We absolutely love a hot hatch here in the UK, and suffice to say, manufacturers have clocked onto this. It feels like they're producing more hot hatches than ever before. It's quite an appealing prospect. You get the performance of a sports car, but you get the practicality of a regular hatchback, so it's easy to see why they are so popular. So today, we're going to bring three key cars in the hot hatch segment together to see just what they offer. We've got the powerful Mercedes-AMG A35, we've got the ever-popular Volkswagen Golf GTi, we've got a car that you might not have thought of as a hot hatch, but it's the CUPRA Formentor, and believe me, it's got some tricks up its sleeve. So buckle up, we're going to find out what all three of these cars have to offer. Okay, so the Formentor is not your traditional hot hatch, but crossovers are big business at the moment, so it makes sense to put one with a powerful engine in it. The CUPRA definitely has some standout touches, such as the copper accents on the front and also on the wheels, which have become a hallmark of the CUPRA brand. It's also got an upright stance, which I think will appeal to a lot of people who like a slightly more commanding view of the road ahead. Though the A35 used to be the more undercover car from AMG's lineup, in recent years it has definitely blown up. Around the back, this one has a huge rear spoiler, while at the front you've got the Pan America grille, which has become synonymous with the AMG models. In fact, most of the time I've spent with this car, most people have thought it was a range-topping A45. It's good to know though that you can delete the rear wing if you want to maybe make it a little bit more undercover. The Volkswagen Golf GTi has always had a kind of all-rounder appeal when it comes to its exterior styling, just as happy as it is in the Nürburgring as it is parked outside the Savoy Hotel. This latest generation of Golf GTi is much the same. It's got some of those tweaks that help elevate it above the regular Golf models, such as the red accents, which are a feature of all GTi models, and the upgraded alloy wheels. I also quite like the neat badges on the flanks too. As we've seen in some of the latest Volkswagen Group products, the Formentor adopts a very screen-centric design for its interior, and that means everything is located within that central screen. The heating and ventilation, you've got some shortcuts here, but they're a little bit dodgy to use because they're touch sensitive, and also they're not backlit, so you can't see them at night. Everything is located in there, and that means that if it's having a bit of trouble, if it's being a bit glitchy, then you really are a bit frozen out of some aspects of the car, but other areas I really like. The material quality is good, it all feels nice and robust, and of course because it's a CUPRA, we've got loads of copper coloured accents which help to brighten up this interior overall. The rear seats are reasonably spacious, though these large bucket seats do eat into the amount of room that you've got back there. Plus, if you're sitting in the back, they do actually obstruct your view of the front somewhat, and that could be a bit of a problem if you have children who frequently get car sick. With its 420-litre boot, the CUPRA Formentor has the largest load area of the three cars that we've brought here today. So you could argue that the crossover has a slight edge in that sense. And you can of course expand that area further by lowering the rear seats. The interior of the A35 is pretty similar to that of the standard Mercedes A-Class, and it's a mixture of good things and bad things. I like the fact that the seating position is nice and low, and you can get relatively low in the car. And I like this steering wheel shape too. It's not too chunky, and it's not too flat-bottomed either. However, these touch-sensitive controls, as they are on the regular A-Class, are just too tricky to use, and it's so easy to go through different menus when you don't want to. The new generation of A35 has got specific dials down here for your driving modes and for your suspension settings, so it's really easy to change those on the fly. You might notice in the middle that we've no longer got a trackpad as we once had to control the infotainment too. And that's a bit of a pain, to be honest, as this is now quite far away. You need to lean over in order to operate it. And also, what do? You put your hand here and you touch these gloss black plastics, which now get all grubby and just not very pleasant. I preferred it when there was a trackpad, so at least you had the option. Rear seat space isn't too bad, though it might be a little bit tight for taller passengers. And when you come into the boot, there's 370 litres of space, which is actually pretty decent for a car of this size. And of course, you can lower the rear seats down to extend that a little bit more. The interior of the GTi offers a classic blend of traditional touches with more modern features. For instance, we've got the tartan trim in here, which has been a key feature on so many generations of the GTi. And we've also got some neat little badges on the steering wheel too. But of course, up front, we've got a very screen-centered cabin area, and it's much the same as we find in the Formentor. The only issue I find with the Golf is that, again, there's a lot of black plastic going on, and all this cowling around here just makes it a little bit shiny, and particularly on a bright day like we're in today, quite reflective. I can see myself glinting off the screen ahead of me, which is just a little bit distracting. As I found in other modern Volkswagen Group products too, the fact that the light switches are up here just feels a little bit counterintuitive, and you don't seem to be able to find them too easily. And the screen itself, well, it's not too bad. It's not the most responsive, but again, we've got heating and ventilation controls down here which aren't backlit, so they're hard to see at night. And if it does freeze, you are frozen out of some of those key functions that help set up the car just as you'd like it. But the seating position is good, and these bucket seats themselves are really comfortable too. In the back, as a traditional hatchback, the Golf has a decent amount of space and headroom isn't too bad even with a panoramic sunroof fitted. Move to the boot and you've got 374 litres of space there, and it's nice and square and it's easy to access too. Of course, like others here, you can fold those rear seats down and you can expand that boot area should you need to. So, the CUPRA Formentor then, arguably the dark horse of the group, would you say? Now obviously we've got a raised ride height compared to the other two here, so I've got a slightly loftier view over the road than I have done with the A35 and with the Golf. But I have got a 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine, again, with 306 brake horsepower. So it's definitely got what you need in terms of performance. In fact, 0 to 60 miles an hour you can do in about 4.7 seconds. I think that's pretty cool to have a car like the Formentor, which doesn't scream performance, but will be able to outperform quite a lot of stuff out on the road. We've also got 4-wheel drive, so in wet conditions, it's going to be pretty good. And actually, you can probably stick it on a set of winter tyres, and it would be great in snow as well. What's it like to drive? Well, the steering itself is a little bit lackluster. It's quite light, and it doesn't feel like it's equipped to deal with the kind of power that it's got under the bonnet. I like that you've got quick fire buttons for the driving modes on the steering wheel though. That's really useful. That means you can toggle through them nice and quickly. Again, as I found on the Golf, the paddles for the gear shifts are just too small and they're too far away. So I can't fathom why no one thought that was too far away. You're leaning round with your hands to try and change the gear shift, and the whole point of a hot hatch is to be involved with the whole process of driving, and taking that away from me makes me feel like I'm not quite as involved as I should be. However, when you're driving it on a normal basis, the Formentor is pretty comfortable. The ride quality is good, and although the visibility isn't the best with that very small rear screen, it's quite an easy car to live with. I think that's been the theme of today, really. Nice and easy to live with as a vehicle. What about the engine noise coming through to the car? Well, there's not an awful lot of it really. Even if I really step on the gas, it doesn't feel like a lot of it is coming through into the cabin. There's quite a lot of like turbo-y induction kind of noise going on, which is relatively exciting. But I feel like the Formentor is leaning more heavily on the comfortable everyday side of things in terms of hot hatches against the outright performance one like the A35. I do also really like the brake feel in the Formentor. You've got a nice solid point of contact at the top. And it's quite reassuringly bitey throughout its entire travel. I think that's really good. Now, of course, what you could call this is a Golf R in sheep's clothing. Everyone knows a Golf R nowadays, but no one knows that the Formentor is basically a Golf R underneath. And I think that's pretty cool, actually. I like that kind of sleeper style nature of cars, but let me know if you think that too in the comment section below. Efficiency isn't the best. We've got around about 33 mpg claimed by CUPRA, and that's a result of a high-powered engine being driven to all 4 wheels. You've got to remember as well with the CUPRA, you've got a big boot, you've got plenty of space inside, far more space than you might realise. So that means you can bring everyone with you to enjoy the journey. Of course you can in the Golf and the A-Class, but it's just a little bit more spacious. For me, I'm just not personally quite as much of a fan of the lofty seating position, but that's just kind of what you get with a crossover, even a performance crossover like the Formentor. You really can't fault how quick the Formentor is though. It's really capable. It feels like as soon as you hit the gas, it's just going. And it shifts through the gears in automatic mode really nicely too. Again, I just don't feel any incentive to do that with these very stubby gear shift paddles. So this is take 2 with the Mercedes-AMG A35. Due to a slight technical glitch with our recording system, I'm now back in the same car at a slightly later date, which is why my hair is slightly different and it's not as nice outside either. However, the car hasn't changed. In fact, this is the exact same car, which means we've got a 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine up front with 306 brake horsepower, and it's essentially a slightly detuned version of the one that you'd get in the full-fat A45. And just as it was the first time I was driving it, it's still very impressive. 0 to 60 comes in 4.5 seconds, and flat out it'll do 155 miles an hour. So in terms of performance, it's definitely not lacking. We've got an automatic gearbox too, and you can take control via the paddles behind the steering wheel, and it's actually a very engaging package. The A45 has a tendency to just feel, well, quite full on really, whereas this A35 is still quick. Don't make any assumptions against that, it's still very powerful. It just feels slightly toned down, a little bit more applicable for everyday driving. But just the same as the A45, we've got four-wheel drive, which means that in greasy conditions like they are now, the A35 has plenty of traction to offer. You've got a variety of different settings which you can toggle through on the steering wheel mounted controls, and in Sport Plus that ramps everything right up to 11. That in terms of throttle response, as you might be able to hear, exhaust note, it's quite loud once you put it into Sport Plus, and it also changes the suspension and makes it ever so slightly firmer. The only thing I would say is that the A35 as standard is quite a firm car, so it does tend to get upset somewhat by large potholes and those imperfections in the road. You can sit here sometimes and just think it's just a little bit too firm, but it is a hot hatch. That's kind of what you expect from this type of vehicle, so you can only hold the firm ride quality against it so much. In terms of efficiency, the A35 is actually pretty decent. Mercedes say that it should do around 39 miles to the gallon. I think on a long run you could probably get slightly more than that. So actually it's not going to use up quite as much fuel as you might think. Of course, drive it in a keen fashion and you'll probably see that figure go down quite significantly. But overall it's a very usable day-to-day package, and it's one that obviously is quite quick. The steering in Sport Plus mode, as we're in now, is quite firm. It sits on the heavier side of things. There's not too much feedback coming through from the steering wheel, but it's the sense of agility that you get in the A35 which really shines through. You can nip it into corners easily and it never feels like it's going to push wide too much. Against the other two cars here, the A35 feels the sharpest in my view. It's definitely the most aggressive in the way it drives, and the engine itself, well, as we've come to expect from AMG derived products, it's a real peach. It's flexible and it's got a lot of character, and it's just very punchy. In any gear and at any speed, it's got more than enough pickup. I also like the fact that this is just a very flexible package, but as I've mentioned, that's kind of the case with all hot hatches really. They're designed to be used day to day, and they're designed to be relatively easy when you don't want to drive in a more spirited fashion. As with others in this group, we've got a 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine in the Golf GTi. I feel like I'm saying that quite a lot today. But whereas the Formentor and the A35 are producing over 300 horsepower, the GTi has 242 brake horsepower. Of course, you'd have to go up to the full spec R to get over that 300 horsepower mark, but we thought today that having the GTi as one of the all-time greatest hot hatches in here was deserving. It deserved to be up against other rivals in its class. And of course we've not got four-wheel drive either, so you could argue that this car's not going to be quite as capable in the wet, and that's the case. It's going to scrabble a little bit more when things get sticky, but how does it feel when you're actually pushing on compared to the other two? Well, I actually really like the GTi. I think that it's got a nice bit of combination of softness, everyday usability, but with that performance that you still want. 0 to 60 comes in 6 seconds, so it's certainly not as quick as the other two, but it feels eager, it feels like it wants to go, which is what you want from a normal hot hatch. What I really like in the GTi, particularly this one, is we've got adaptive dampers which I can soften off and make this car nearly as comfortable as a regular Golf. Of course, you're getting some of that patter slightly, but it's not upset by big imperfections in the road quite the same way as the A35 might be. And that means that you could use it all the time and it's not going to be uncomfortable to live with. It's also quite refined, and I'm quite pleased to hear that the engine and the exhaust noise is there when you want it, but it's not intrusive when you don't want it. So when you're just cruising, when you're on a level throttle, it's relatively subdued, and there's not too much tyre noise and there's not too much wind roar either. It's also just quite a good shape, and that's something that all three of these cars have in common. They're all a good size on the road, and you can place them really nicely within the lane. That's something that attracts me to the hot hatch segment anyway, is that these cars don't feel overly large, but are still really useful. The only thing I do find with the Golf GTi is that from the outside, and I've followed this car a little bit today too when we've been doing some driving about, it sounds really cool. I think it sounds like a great car from the outside. Inside, it doesn't seem like that's been translated through. You can slow down, you can drop 2 gears on these very stubby little paddles. Bigger paddles, please, Volkswagen. And you get this kind of like raspy, drony noise, which isn't all that pleasant. But from the outside, it sounds really good. So I can't understand why you wouldn't have translated that through inside the cabin. But there we are. The byproduct of that is it's a little bit quieter and easier to live with. It's not as sharp as the Club Sport model. We've just got the regular GTi today. And I think if you wanted a bit more engagement, then you could go to that Club Sport, and that would provide that extra bit of edge that you might be looking for. But as we're proving today, hot hatches aren't about those big numbers. And I think in recent years, it's been a bit of a, well, almost like an arms race in the hot hatch segment for people to deliver the best, quickest acceleration times, the biggest outputs of engines from quite small capacity units. And the GTi shows that actually you can still get some good engagement and still have fun, most importantly, but without having to be in a car which is really full on, really high performance and a little bit intimidating, particularly if you've not driven performance cars before. Now, Volkswagen claims that you should be able to get around about 38 mpg, and on average we've been seeing about 41 in this car, so it's quite usable in terms of its consumption. And I think on a longer trip you could definitely probably squeeze it up to about 45, maybe, if you were doing really, really well. Visibility is good. As for a regular hatch, we've got nice slim pillars, we've got a good view out behind, though the relatively thick rear pillar does mean that you have to be a little bit more careful over your shoulder. But again, this is going to be a car that's easy to park, easy to drive around, easy to get around roundabouts. But when you're on a nice quick country road, which I am at this point, although I'm stuck behind a van, it's going to deliver, and it's going to make it just a little bit more exciting. And that's what hot hatches should do. They should make everyday journeys just a little bit more exciting. What do you want from a hot hatch? You want it to be practical, you want it to be easy to live with, and of course you want it to be quite fast. And in that sense, I've been quite surprised by the Formentor, because it does all of those things really well. It's the most spacious here, it's still really quick, and it feels like a car that you could live with every day and still exploit those interesting roads as and when you want to. The Golf GTi continues to be a great all-rounder. It's a car that you'd be happy to jump in each and every morning. And finally, the A35. What's that like? Well, you can't fault how blisteringly quick it is from A to B, but I think the interior lets itself down slightly. Which car would I be picking? Well, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I'd be leaning towards the Golf GTi. It's a car that I'd really like to own, and a car that I think you'd be really excited to have every day. Thank you for watching this 3-car review on motors.co.uk. Now, if you have enjoyed this video, please leave us a like below and let us know in the comment section what you think of each of these cars that we've brought here today. Since you're here, please remember to subscribe to the motors.co.uk YouTube channel, and if you hit that bell icon, you'll get notified each time we upload a new video.